Joe, thank you so much for being on the show. I've really been looking forward to finally meeting you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a big fan for a while.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we were discussing before we started the interview that Joe and I know a lot of the same people. We were kind of in the same area, just at different times. Again, the art world's so small. So you may or may not have been a visiting artist when I was an MFA student.
That's that's right. Yeah, that's a kind way of saying I'm much older.
Oh man. So yeah, let's take it back then. So I always love hearing from artists a little bit about their background, like maybe where they grew up, where they're from, and how they originally started to get into the arts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, other than like, starting with the classic, a kid who likes to draw a lot, I mean, I think that you know, the I s- basically like I drew through high school, played in bands and stuff like that, and was in art classes. And had an amazing but totally crazy high school art teacher who would not fly in today's academic or institutional world at all. A guy named John Asoff. And he inspired a lot of people. I mean, I grew up primarily in a college town on the border of Washington and Idaho.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of college kids, or I mean, kids of college professors, a lot of people trying to express themselves, and this guy really inspired a lot of us. And I don't think when I went to college that I knew if I was going to study art particularly. My dad was a sociologist, and I think I thought I was going to study sociology or anthropology or something like that. And then, took my first drawing class and loved it. And then the next semester, I was taking three academic classes in the social sciences, but not studio class, and I was just miserable. And so I just started taking more studio classes, and this is University of Washington, starting in 1990, and then studied abroad in Siena, Italy, and studied art history there and fell in love with art history and still didn't know if I was going to do studio or art history. And I think there was a time I thought I was going to get an MFA and a PhD, just because I couldn't decide. And so I ended up studying both studio and art history, graduating with a degree of both at University of Washington. And I was saying before the show, I mean, it was a really exciting time to be in Seattle and, in the early to mid 90s. And then also like, it was a great time to get out of Seattle and explore and using painting in graduate school to, like as so many people do, to jump across the country and to explore a new world. And I just sort of, and I had some great teachers that really kind of inspired me to like push myself more than I thought possible, or my conception of what being an artist was. And then, it just sort of kept going deeper and deeper into the labyrinth of painting.
Mhm, mhm. I love hearing about how you're interested in anthropology or sociology, because I think so many artists I know have an interest there because we are digging into so many ideas, history, where things are coming from, commenting on it, or at least discussing it as an idea. So I think that that's really, really cool. So you come out to you go West Coast to East Coast, and then can you take us into after your time in graduate school and like getting your footing post that, and how that went for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that I've had this funny thing at I don't know if John Moore was still there when you were at BU. Oh, he must have left by that time. But the I remember I had this funny conversation with him as I was leaving grad school, and I had started at that time volunteering at a community gallery in my neighborhood, the gallery at Green Street, which was an amazing gallery run by James Hall, um, who's still one of my closest friends. But he put on really great programming. It was a really great space, and there's a lot of artists involved. And I'd gone to John, and he knew that I was involved with that. And he was like, I was like, asking for career advice, like how do you get a teaching job? How do you get a gallery? How do you do that? And he was like, he was like, that gallery that you're involved in? He's like, that's the ticket, man. Like you gotta stay with this community and like that, build to the, and I was like, what? Those guys? Like, are you kidding me? Like that's my best shot? Like you don't even know that. But and I joke about it, but at the same time, like, he was kind of right. Like, so I left BU in 99, spring of 99 and was an art installer for about a year and a half, working in galleries, museums, and stuff like that. And then a lot of my friends who were also volunteering at the gallery um, were a lot of my friends who were also volunteering at the gallery. They were also art installers around town, and we would just put on these shows together. And the openings were like parties. And a lot of those people are still my friends today. Like I just had an opening last week, and like a core group of that group of artists that we were like hanging around this gallery 25 years ago, are still like the core group of artists that I'm working with today. And we all kind of were like like showing it like um nonprofits and like and then we kind of like moved up into the commercial world and then kind of move it, like group shows and then solo shows. And so I think that like I mean if you look at my resume, like the full resume, it's like these tiny little incremental steps, almost as you kind of move up the art world food chain. But I think that for me, that group was just really like having that community. I emphasize it to my students all the time, but it's hard to uh, recreate or to create, but it's also like um, without having that, it can get pretty desperate at times. And so I'm very, very grateful for the community around me that helped. Um, they're always, even to this day, kind of like the people I'm painting for.
I love that. I also can like, I had a professor who I could feel saying exactly what John said. That's the ticket, man. Like
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, but he's right, like this idea of community, like what you're saying is so incredibly important to be there for like the ups and the downs and to understand what you're doing, how your ideas are shifting or growing, having a sounding board. I think you're so right with that. And I love that you still have the people from that space,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
can be there as witnesses too. Um, so you're located now in JP and you're at Brandeis. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, about teaching while also being a really prolific artist? So you make a ton of
Oh,
site-specific
thanks.
work,
Thanks,
a lot of
thanks.
paintings on top of also being what I've heard is a really inspirational teacher.
Oh, that's very kind. That's very kind. I don't know how far you had to dig in the students like to find somebody who would say that. But no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think that when I first started teaching, I was kind of like fresh out of grad school and I was pretty cocky, like with my own practice and like what I could contribute to painting. But I was in a really awkward stage of where my work was. Like I think I was coming out of BU. We talked a little bit about before about it. I wasn't like drinking the Kool-Aid. I wasn't making sort of like late 90s, early 2000s BU work. I was trying to change my work a lot. And I landed teaching with a lot of other painters that were really into the idea of kind of a BU centric vibe. And so I kept my work really pretty far away from teaching. And it wasn't like a conscious choice. It was more like this is not ready to be around students and this is not ready. And so I've been actually very slow to kind of share my own work with my students at any point. And I think that there's like a little bit of humility with inside that. I think there's also a recognition that everybody has to be it's an idiosyncratic practice where you have to find your own self, and then people finding me is not necessarily beneficial for them. I almost do it to a fault, I would say. That I think that sometimes it's like looking back, I think maybe my own insecurities lasted too long in how um in being willing to sort of share what I do with the community of students around me. But I do, I'm so grateful to be able to have um, dedicated students that I have another vehicle outside my studio to talk about painting, to talk about ideas, and also to kind of question things around me. I think that a lot of times there's the impression that when you're teaching that I'm just telling what I know about painting all the time, but I think that there's that kind of there's a real back and forth where I'll be saying something to a student. Well, this is, like if you want to make a painting, you got to make it like this and do this kind of thing. I'll be like, what am I talking about? Like, like, is this, this isn't the, so it gives you the opportunity, or you see someone's student that, make work that kind of challenges where you think, and then you're in the studio the next day and you're kind of thinking about what they were doing the day before. And then it kind of shifts your own thinking. And I think that, like I really love the elasticity of thinking about art making and the art making practice, and how that elasticity becomes a real benefit in my studio and kind of keeps me nimble, in some ways. Like sometimes I think that I think I would almost be more like product driven, or follow a formula or a recipe in my studio a bit more if I was a full-time artist. Whereas I think that like teaching kind of keeps me a little more elastic in my thinking about uh, creating and like where the next body of work is going to go, or like teasing out little different ideas, and also my colleagues, like when we do have group crits and stuff like that, I find it really inspiring to just listen to other people talk about um, painting. And that's one of the things that I've been most grateful for from, when I started teaching in 2001, is just being able to listen to my um, colleagues, different viewpoints, even if I disagree with them, it kind of helps me kind of think about my own thinking, if that makes sense.
Well, it's like you almost learn more when you disagree on something, because you have to think like, okay, I disagree with what they're saying. Why am I disagreeing with what they're saying? What does that mean about me and my beliefs or what I'm doing in my work? So I think that's really, really interesting. This idea of being elastic or nimble through the dialogue and process of uh, not just teaching, but I guess responding. It's almost like a response
Yeah, yeah.
that's happening in there. And you're talking about how you feel like that's really served you well in your studio. So I'd love to shift now to talking about your studio. Like if you could take us into a day in your studio, what that kind of looks like for you when you roll in there. I've actually been in your studio building before down the
Oh
hall.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Oh, to visit Elizabeth. Yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
The Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, it's like I wish I had this like cool, like romantic, like I like put out the paints in the morning and I think about like what's going on, but like and I like kind of like, you know, respond to what's happening on the surface of the paintings and stuff like that. But unfortunately, like my practice is just not that cool. It's ever since about 2017 when I did the Mass Mocha piece, I've been doing uh, a process in my work that I love. I love doing it. And I love the way that like certain ideas come forth and the way that work works, but like the way the work looks. But in general, like I have no idea what I'm going to be doing from day to day, other than the fact that like I come in and they're like work in progress. But I mean, as far as like the repetition, I work heavily with stencils. I use a lot of spraying in the paintings. There's a lot of handmade paintings. I mean, hand painted paint parts of the painting. So like, I'll come into the studio and depending where a painting's at, like I can be completely covered in garb, painting clothes and, um, spraying my paintings back and forth, putting different layers down and stuff like that. Or I could come into the studio and depending how where a painting's at, be like just with a pair of tweezers, picking pieces of vinyl
Mhm.
off for hours and hours and hours. So I mean, I think that for me, it's very very unromantic work at all as far as like thinking of myself as an artist. It's like, and it's like really, I love oil paint, but like the process I do doesn't work in oil paint. It breaks down and stuff. And so, like the layers of the stencil don't adhere. And anyway, and so like everything's sticky all the time. Like my stencils are sticky. I'm using sticky acrylic paint. Like the spacing tape for the stencils so I'm always like shaking stuff off of my and I'm like, and I'm like, how did this become my process? Like, like a um really funny story is that when I did the Mass Mocha piece, the deputy director of Mass Mocha, who is like this guy Larry, who's really, really, really funny guy, really, but he has like a dry sense of humor,
Yeah.
just like, and really kind of like understated delivery. And I was like getting to this thing where, I can talk more about it a little bit, but it's like getting to the end of this huge, massive mural, and it was actually going to work out. And I was like, kind of like getting excited. And he looked at me, he's like, congratulations. And and in my head, I'm thinking, thanks, man. I can't believe it. He's like, congratulations. You're going to get well known for a very expensive, labor intensive process. And I was like, wait, what? Like, but again, like he was totally right. He was totally right. It was like, I was like, if some people have asked me, like, they said like, well, you show your process on Instagram and all this kind of stuff, and people, you're very open about sharing how you make your work. Aren't you worried someone's going to copy your work? And I'm like, oh my God, if somebody wants to spend the money and try to copy this moronic process that has become mine, like let them, like go ahead. I'm like, if you're going to copy somebody, copy like a monochromatic abstract painter that like is easy to do and you can figure it out. Not that that's all easy to do, but like do something cheaper. But anyway, so my day in the studio is really dependent on where the paintings are at, and it is very much like the work is a lot like printmaking in a way. They're like giant prints, and so there's a lot of like masking and revealing, and then sort of creating a resist, and then there's kind of like you put a layer on, and then you peel it off and you reveal it, and so it really is like making sort of like giant woodcuts. And so if you can imagine where each layer becomes its own sort of system, or it becomes its own application. So it's like kind of builds like where the day is.
Were you interested in printmaking before this process happened? Were you like one of those painters secretly always in the printmaking space, or was it just like a totally different, way of creating, how process oriented it is?
It was a slow build, but I would say that I never planned on it, and I never had sort of, I mean, I took printmaking classes, um, but I did work but I never really thought of myself as a printmaker. I wasn't like an excellent printmaker. I wasn't really good at it or whatever. But when in between undergrad and grad, I worked for Stone Press Editions in Seattle, and and it was like a lot of wildlife prints and stuff like that as a all lithography we did. But we did some really cool one. We did some like Jacob Lawrence prints and stuff like
Oh,
that were,
okay.
yeah, yeah. It was always been a huge, has always had a huge impact on my work too, and the color and the geometry and composition. The he like so I worked and I was just like the print assistant to the master printer for it was lithography. And he, when I first did the first mural in 2013 for the Rag and Bone clothing company, which is a weird little story on its own, but I had no idea how to recreate. I was painting in oils. I was still using I was using stencils, but not a lot. Um, and I didn't know how to make a big painting. And so I think I went back at that point to my printmaking experience, and color separated out the image the way I would have done with a lithograph if were working with an artist. And so at that point, I was kind of like, oh, I'll just think of it as a big print, and then from 2013 to 2017, I didn't get asked to do any other mural and I didn't do any other big stuff. So I just kind of put that process aside. And then when the Mass MoCA um, piece kind of fell in my lap, Hello America, that then I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And then so I went back to that printmaking process. And then so from 2017 to now, it's kind of been that way. And so I think that I didn't really think of myself as a printmaker but I think that as this process developed, I had to rely on my printmaking background to kind of propel the stuff forward.
Oh, I have so many questions about
Okay,
like, your
shoot.
work, etc. But first, I'm going to have to ask you to potentially share the rag and bone story if it's
All
funny.
right, all right. Well, no, I mean it's just one of those things where I was sitting there in jury duty. It was like in jury duty, right? You
Yes.
know, like the part where you're like you're waiting for them to call you, and they're like the lawyers are for the defendant and the plaintiff are like haggling or something,
Yeah.
and you're just sitting there. And so I'm like scrolling through my phone, scrolling, like totally got nothing, I mean, this was like 2013. So I wasn't like, I mean, it might have even been a BlackBerry at that point. I don't know. I don't know. It was either way. It wasn't like there was like great news to read on the thing. So I'm looking through every single little email that I ever got. And like, I didn't bring a book or anything, I think. Anyway, and so I found this email from somebody. Somebody had recommended my name there's a mural wall that used to get tagged all the time. It's the rag and bone on Elizabeth and I want to say it's Elizabeth and Houston
Hmm.
Street, and kind of by the new museum. And the wall used to get tagged all the time, and uh, they were like, "Okay, we're going to start this little mural program," and so that it wouldn't get filled with graffiti. And so they contracted like every month, which must have been exhausting. They contracted some street artist to come and do a mural there. And somebody had given him my name. I'd never done a mural project, right? Like now people recommend me to, for X, Y, and Z. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but still it makes sense now. I've done a bunch of murals. I'd done
Yeah.
zero. I'm like, who gave my name to this person, and what? And so I started responding while I was in the jury duty, and they got right back to me and they were like, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I did have a lot of other stuff going on. I was like, okay. And it was a very limited budget. And so like I went down there and like I just had no idea. Like New York City and like street art. And like I was like on like winter break from Brandeis. You know what I mean? I was like an academic, and like and everybody was like walking around talking to me like I was like some cool street artist, and I was not at all. I like had no idea what I was doing at all. And it was pretty funny because like I didn't realize that like so many New Yorkers have an opinion about street art and are willing to share it with you. And it was literally I don't even remember this in 2013, but like it must have been the fall because I think in that September, I think I was installing in October, but that September, Banksy had done one project a day throughout Manhattan. And so
Hmm.
the whole city was just alive with street art. Income me, I barely even knew who Banksy was at that point, Like
Yeah.
it's just not my wheelhouse, not my world. And then somebody had put up a faux Banksy on the wall before I started it, and like people were like mad. They were like, "Oh, you're gonna paint over the Banksy? I can't believe you're gonna do that." And I'm like, "Who's this guy?" Like I could like have an idea about it. Anyway, it was quite an education, And I was like, I like had a sweat jacket and like a hoodie on and like spray paint and stuff. And like I'm like, this is not me, like but everybody was like, oh yeah, but it was pretty cool. It was actually like it was the first time that I ever thought that people could be interested in watching the process. Do you know what I mean? Of like painting it up. Because basically it's like a landscape painting is revealed, it's covered up, an abstract painting is created on top of that, and then it's sort of peeled away, and the sort of the reveal of the two different worlds of painting kind of colliding. And so I think that that was the first time I was like, wow, someone could be interested in watching it develop. And I never actually considered that. You're kind of a standard kind of paint dauber.
Hmm.
I mean, it's pretty boring unless you have it like on really fast, you're watching like a time lapse of it or something. But I didn't think that people would be interested in just seeing how the thing was made. And that was my first experience with that.
That so a couple questions in response to that. First
Sure,
off, did
sure.
you ever find out who gave your name?
No, I never
What?
did. Never
Oh my
did.
gosh,
Never
that's
did. No,
crazy. I so want to know.
no.
Was it just somebody who had like randomly seen your work somewhere, a friend? I don't know. Um, and it also leads me to this other question, which is, that was your first experience making this mural piece, and now you've had like the mass mocha. You've had these really large, labor-intensive pieces that are out there. Like you were talking about this process that you're engaged with also in your studio. Um, so, can you talk a little bit about two things: the role of labor in your work, like your thoughts on
Hmm.
artist, but also, how art functions in society. Like you saw people like really responding to what you're doing, and like
Hmm.
how you feel like you play a role in that.
You mean in like the how art functions in our
Yep.
society?
Yeah, yeah, and like what your how you feel like your work now
Oh,
functions.
my work. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that the Mass Mocha piece, I think that I mean, I really had, the way that that came about was um the curator for that piece, Denise Marconish, we'd done a couple studio visits. She was very supportive of the work, the oil paintings that was doing at that point. She basically said to me, like, I really support you, like your work. Um, if I have a painting show in about 2 to 3 years that we could work some of this, curate some of this in. But if you want to do a mural, we could do something next year. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And the funny part is they were like, have you done big work before? And I was like, yeah, yeah, I've done big work. I've done big work, which is that rag and bone piece, which was 10
Yeah,
feet, 10 feet by 14 feet.
yeah.
The Mass Mocha space was 14 feet by 150.
Oh my
So it
God.
was literally like it was insane. I was so out of my league.
Oh,
But I mean, I would say, and this is goes it does answer goes back to answering your second question first, is like I knew, I had probably one of the most influential pieces that's ever been at the Rose. And you're
mhm.
talking about the Dana Schutz show, earlier on, is that the Mark Bradford Sexy Cash. It was a mural on the staircase. I probably went and saw that show, and particularly that piece, more than anything else I've revisited at the Rose. It really had a profound effect on me, and in the way that it commanded the whole space.
Yeah.
Yet every little painting move was at a very physical, intimate scale. It wasn't like a giant blown up painting. It
Mhm.
was a huge, huge mural painting, but everything still functioned on like a millimeter level of color oscillation and difference. And I knew when I did that Mass Mocha piece, I wanted to create something that was gigantic, and it just commanded the whole space, but also talked to the individual on a very human, personal level. And to me, I think that like that duality is something that is really important in creating this kind of sense of wonder in my larger works. I really want things to be at human scale and communicate with people in with a certain kind of intimacy. And that leads into answering to your question of how I see my work functioning in society. I think that through color, through layering of images, and through layering text upon text, I can create this sort of visual dynamism, if you will, or sort of like this like dynamic visual experience that kind of creates a sense of wonder. And in that moment of wonder, like through the layers of text or even through some of the color, like I can create a relationship that speaks to an individual at where they're at. And that's the whole goal to me, is just to be able to, like when, I talk about it with my students a lot. It's like, when you fall in love with a work of art, or you're kind of like um experiencing that sort of sense of wonder or amazement, it creates a moment where you're very giving of yourself, and there's like a suspension of your own identity in the world around you, and you're like falling into it. Like, to me, that moment is everything. And that's the transmission. That's that 3 seconds, boom, you have that opportunity to communicate with somebody. And you try to carry as much information in that as you can. And I
Mhm.
think that, to me, um, the, in my personal experience, and other people probably say otherwise, but um, that's always been the true reveal of the power of art to me, is that sense of wonder where you become something that you aren't, and then you get to decide, as your mind kind of reels back from that scary place of loss of self. Am I going to be somebody new, or I'm going to be the person I was and reject what I've just seen? And I think that that's, to me, that's the role that I see in the murals, that, in creating that sense of space. And I think, and even to like almost every mural I've done since then, there's always been that sense of the grand, and also the sense of the intimate, which is really important to me.
I love that. I love that idea of the grand and the intimate. And yeah, Mark Bradford's a perfect example of that. Like genius, right? Like how
Hmm.
his work holds a space and you can still get up there and really experience it. So you end up doing this piece. Like I also really love how you say yes to things. I think that's a really important lesson for all of us is, people can get stuck in their head and think, well, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
150 feet. Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah, almost killed me. Which also goes back to your second question, which I
Yeah,
didn't answer,
yeah,
is the
yeah, yeah,
sense of labor.
yeah.
I mean, I joke about it, but I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, in my 20s, I made tiny little paintings that were like, 18 by 24, and now I'm I'm like this middle-aged dude up on scaffolding, like ripping stuff. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Like, I should not have, like, word of advice, make the big stuff when you're young, not at my age. But, the sense of labor is just immense. It's immense in some of the big paintings, where it's like I end up, there's so many layers. Each painting is like three paintings on top of itself. And so there's it is really an incredible amount of work and production to put them off, which also put them on. And even when someone contracts me to do a mural, whether it's a museum, or a public commission or a private commission, it's you know the gratitude and humility of someone, like dumping. It's not like I'm just buying a couple cans of spray paint and, like,
Yeah.
like going at it for a couple hours. I mean, it's a real expensive production to pull off, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And so I think it's really, I mean, it's a crazy thing. I really wouldn't have predicted it. And also, like, both with the Mass MoCA and with the ICA mural at the watershed, I had to run a team of people, which you never think. I mean, I was like an easel painter for,
Mhm,
like 20 years. Like, and so, like, I'm suddenly managing what four people are doing on my painting,
mhm,
for 8 hours a day. I had no idea how to do that, and to, how to figure it out, and even to have a sense of, trying to create a sense of shared goal,
mhm.
like, hey, yeah, it's going to be really cool. You're going to really like being a part of it. And, like, I've been really, I mean, that's one of those things that, like, you would never expect. You're working with a team of people who are, like, getting paid through a museum, and they get really into your process, and they want to make it too. You're like, oh my God, that feels so cool. It's like, it's really, that's an awesome feeling. Most of the other murals I made with just one or two studio assistants, but those ones were with a team. And so there's all these different ways that labor works.
I think that is so interesting, to hear about this because there is some, politics involved in things that you're talking about in your work,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
there's this history of labor, right? And supporting laborers, et cetera. And then you have this team that you get to support, they're getting paid, they're doing all of these things. So I think it's really interesting how it all starts to tie together. And I wonder, you hadn't, like you said, you're an easel painter for so long in your 20s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, what have you learned through being somebody who's now had to work with a team on your creative process? Is there anything you can share with us about like takeaways from that or things that you may have realized about your own process through doing this?
I mean, I think you also, I mean, you gotta, I mean, it's funny. I would say that, like, I mean, I think that learning how other people can contribute, and I think that, like, a lot of times as artists, we think we're listening to the world around us, but it's always a lot of times us being like, "Tuk, tuk, tuk, tuk," just talking at the paintings. And I think that, like, having, I think that the work, I think that the work was got so big so fast, not like in popularity, but big as in literally scale.
Right.
Got big so big so fast that I needed help. Do you know what I mean? Like there was never really the option that people wouldn't help, and that's not just to put it on. Like that guy James Hall that I was talking about, who ran Gallery Green Street, I hired him to help me with the Mass Mocha project. Like we would just come back from work and I wouldn't know how to complete what I was trying to do the next day. And so
Mhm.
we would stay up, most of the night, usually after a few drinks. And we would figure out like how are we going to do this? And so I think that a lot of times, especially work that's process driven or has a requires a great deal of production, I think sometimes those other voices don't get either enough cred or even talked about
Mm.
how much like I'm working these things out. My friend Brian Zink, who's another artist too, that I'm always talking about like how would I do this? How would I do this kind of, like what kind of stencil would you use? Like what kind of, like I use heat guns to seal the stencil. Um, it's a very boring technical thing, but this is just an example. Like I use heat guns to seal the stencil down so that I don't get paint bleed,
Mhm.
because even if I seal it with acrylic, sometimes it'll bleed right under. But if I use the heat guns, like that's something that those guys, Brian and James, basically were like, oh yeah, you don't want that? You should do this, And I think that sometimes with that sense of labor, I think that you don't there's this impression that the artist is always coming up with this stuff on their own and they're always kind of doing stuff. And I think that I've been fortunate enough in the larger projects and even just the process in general, how it's developed, that there's been a lot of voices that kind of have really influenced how I'll try to do something. And I'd say that that also feeds into some of the projects. It kind of goes back to an earlier question about the role of art. I've been really like the process is open and porous for other people's opinions. And then a lot of times the content, especially in the larger projects, I'll have it's not just me thinking up all the ideas, it's like the project I did for the Roxbury Public Library here in Boston, just a few like less than a mile from my studio. I worked with teen poets and they came up with poems about their neighborhood and about Roxbury. And so that became a lot of the text I mean, all their poems are represented in the mural 100%. And so, like, that type of inclusion of literally content, um, sort of kind of that willingness to include. I didn't have to adapt it or change it. Of course, I'm making color decisions and font decisions, and I'm putting the stencil down. So I have lots of artistic control, but just to have a process that like allows their content to be um, you know, a main element of the different layers of the content. And something else we did at the Museum, working with a poet who unfortunately passed away just last year, Marjorie Agassiz, and we worked on all of the text is from her last book
Mm.
about the ocean. And she was a Chilean poet, and she grew up on the Pacific Ocean, and then sort of towards the end of her life was on the Atlantic Ocean. And she very much talks about how the Pacific Ocean was this kind of wild, raging, passionate thing, like when she was younger. And then the Atlantic Ocean was much more this peaceful thing. So we worked together selecting text that we would use as like the whole piece
Mhm.
about and so that sort of collaborative process um, really to me is something that's it's very core to the work as well, and it comes from the process, whether I'm using heat guns or whether like, hey, can I use some of your poetry? So it's like a little bit, it's a very open, the gallery size paintings, not so much, but the big murals, definitely there's like a real openness to it that many people might not see just by looking at it.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing about all of this and hearing about like the poems by, high school students in Roxbury being in these large pieces. It's just really incredible. I mean, for me, it takes on like this whole other level of being invested into, people, in expression and multiple ways of expression and bringing that together. Like that collaboration, I think is just really, really incredible. Um, so moving to more the gallery paintings that you were
Hmm.
talking about, um, you mentioned, you had this meeting with a curator, Denise, and it was like, well, you can do it if you keep doing the oil paintings in a couple of years, we could do this, or we could do this other piece, basically. When you left the oil, like, was it hard for you to move from working in the medium of oil painting away to like more acrylic and like that type of world, or no?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah. 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 No, it was a hard pivot. It was a hard pivot.
Mhm.
And, I mean, it's easy to kind of narratively kind of string it together now, but I mean, the main feeling was when I coming to the end of Mass Mocha, the install, and like I basically, I'm like vertically silk screening on a wall, which no one should ever do. It's like if you have an idea for something to do and you go to YouTube to look at videos how to do it and nobody has done it, like that's a bad sign. Like I actually talked to Gary Lichtenstein, who runs the print shop out there at Mass Mocha. When I met him, he was like, "Oh man, I've been wanting to meet you." He was basically like, "Why did you do that?" Like, there's a man who's been like silk screening his whole life. He's like, "Why did you do that?" But like, so I basically created this process. But I'm like, this is how I visualize it. I'm like pulling away the last stencils, revealing the piece, and I'm like, this is the process I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
I'm like, you spend your whole time in the studio wanting to do something that's unique. I'm going
Mhm.
to do this for the rest of my life. So in some ways, like I was like, the oil paintings were not an option anymore. Do you know what I mean? And it was just like you've created some way of working that like nobody else really does at this point. Like this is what you want to go to. Also, like strategically, like we all do in our world, like the idea that I made this ginormous piece that a bunch more people who'd never seen my work would see. And if someone said like, "Oh, do you have any work like this?" And I was like, "No."
Yeah.
Seemed like a really dumb idea. And so I basically came back to the studio, which you got to imagine that my studio, the footprint of my studio is like 1/5 of the size of the mural, my entire studio, right? Like, so I couldn't like to make something. So I had it's funny to say because I think so many artists, or the impression is that it's very difficult to scale up. Like I
Mhm.
had a lot of problems scaling down. Like I made like the first paintings that I made after Mass Mocha looked like just huge hunks of the wall had been like put in my studio. You know,
Mhm.
it didn't make any sense for the scale of the object. It looked like they were like chunks of a really big mural that were on the studio floor, and then I would put them on a wall. And so I had a harder time figuring out how to make the work small again. And there were four paintings that my gallery took to Miami in 20, this must have been fall of 2017 after Mass Mocha. And those four paintings, and I think we sold two, we have two left. They're still some of my favorite paintings to this day because it was me trying to figure out that process at a smaller scale.
Mhm.
And I was like, I got it, you know, and so that work, once I had those four paintings, I was like, okay, we can do this, you know.
Mhm.
And then the acrylic became um, something that just took off, you know. And been religiously, and then, you know, I don't know if any of your listeners, are imagining, and this goes back to the printmaking as well, but like I don't use like acrylic tubes of paint. I'm not like, um, I don't squish out little bits of acrylic. So it wasn't like I was switching from squishing out little bits of oil paint on a glass palette and making a painting, which is what I was doing before. Like I use for my murals, I use Gara paint, which
Mhm.
it's amazing, amazing. I love them. I love them. I love them so much. But it comes as a pigment in a liquid dispersion that you mix in acrylic. So in a big thing of acrylic. So I'm mixing, it's all kind of stirring, plastic containers of paint. I don't even really, other than the few times I do an oil painting now, I don't really use a palette. I use, these plastic cups of containers that I'm mixing all the time, which was much more like how we mixed printmaking ink when we were doing, about to run an edition, and I mix colors now like I used to at Stone Press Editions for the lithographer, and much less like that. So it really was a hard pivot because everything changed. I wasn't even using, I was, before Mass Mocha, I was using, like 90% brushes. Now we use 10%. I'm
Mhm.
using rollers and sprays and, different ways of putting on the paint. And so like everything had a hard pivot, like
Mhm.
almost instantly. It's weird. I had this sort of incremental process that got me to Mass Mocha, and then everything was just like,
Mhm.
left turn,
Totally
and
shifting everything, it sounds like. That's a huge pivot as an artist. But I guess again, like your experience working at the printmaking space, also just everything that you've picked up, I guess you were able to put into this new work. I do have a question too about like when you are working on these layers in your painting, and I think it goes to this question about like I'm curious about how you start a piece, like if
uh-huh.
there are sketches, like how you're selecting the color, and then when you have that landscape on there, how is that put on? Is that more with a brush, or is that going to be used with stencils?
Most of the, it's almost like 100% stencils. When I say it's like a woodcut,
Mhm.
it's like if you think of like Hokusai's or Hiroshige's um sort of traditional woodcut,
Mhm.
Japanese landscape woodcuts. I really pretty much work the same way, whereas sort of answering both questions. I work first part of the painting is just really building that gradient back and forth. And if you could imagine like that first layer of the wood block, with the different colors on the brayer, I'm doing that kind of like with a spray, an industrial, it's not airbrush, but it's like an industrial paint sprayer you get at Home Depot. And, there's like 6, 7 colors that go onto each sort of fade landscape. And then I color separate out any landscape imagery that I use into stencils in the same way that a wood block is separated in color stencils, and each one, and sometimes there's fades with inside each block, if that makes sense. And I call it block, but it's a stencil. It's a vinyl cut stencil. And so and so the landscapes, and then there'll be some like areas where I'm like, oh, I should put a yellow here, and or I should put, oh, I need one more darker blue. And at that point, I usually bring in the brush a little
Mhm.
bit because I'm like, oh, I'm not going to go back and find a little stencil for this one little area. And then, so a lot of times that's when I'll kind of bring in, and I like the idea that like with inside these hidden layers, or inside these layers, you're like, wait, was that made by a brush? Like you can't, it's sort of that way of sort of obfuscating some of the process. But the whole landscape gets built up as layers of stencils, like very much like a wood block. And then the text stencil, which is the one that goes is the text that goes over the whole thing, gets put on, and then it usually gets sprayed or rolled or painted up again after that. And it's just like a whitewash. It's like a completely, usually I start with a color and then the whole landscape's gone and I don't see it again until the end of the painting.
Mhm.
And then I build the abstract painting on top of that. And again, I've done paintings where that abstraction occurs, gesturally with a brush. I haven't done that in a while yet, but I have done that. Or there's like more of lately the most recent work has been very involved with sort of like geometric design and geometric abstract painting or op art, and that was kind of an interest of mine. And so that's kind of like in that bit on top of it. And then so there's the whole complete abstract painting on top of this buried landscape painting. And then I peel off the abstract painting, and then it like sits for an abstract painting for a little while, and then I peel off the larger text, and then it becomes the mesh or the conflation of those two worlds on top of each other.
Oh, the reveal. I'm just like imagining the reveal in this.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you're selecting the colors for your paintings, like, can you take us into that, like how you kind of plan that out or how
Oh,
you're,
absolutely,
because you've
absolutely.
got incredible color palettes.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Yeah,
That's very
yeah.
kind of you. Because I was really insecure about my
Oh,
color for a really long time. Like I really was just like, I hear other painters talk about, I'm like, what's this big deal about color? Who cares what the color is? It's all about the expression or mark and so I think that I'm definitely not a natural colorist if there is such a thing as that. But I mean, I think it also, just thinking about it aloud, I think that everybody has to just like slowly develop the sensitivity to it. But
Mhm, mhm.
anyway, I think that um, the sort of surface answer that I would give is that the if I do commissions or murals, I have to design everything. I do it all through Illustrator, and I have to give a deliverable that this
Mhm.
is what I'm going to make for you.
Mhm.
And it's really bizarre. I never planned this, but I can actually make it really freakishly close. When I make it in real life, I can make it really close to what what the
That's
visual. Yeah, yeah, no, it's crazy. Like with the library project, it was almost anticlimactic when we finished because we were like, "Oh, that's what we proposed."
I guess that's better though than doing the final reveal and you're like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. That's true. Very much so. It's like you're like, okay, what am I gonna say? It did
yeah.
not turn out the way. But but yeah, so I think that so I have to plan it out. But then when I do the regular sort of gallery paintings, I never do that. I always respond in between. I don't ever really plan out colors. Don't
Mhm.
plan out the abstraction. I don't plan to the end. I just start with the idea of a landscape, and then I start with the idea of the text, and then I build abstraction onto it, and I pick colors. Um, or I wouldn't say I pick colors, that I think about colors and the way that colors would react to each other. Inevitably, I think about what is underneath in the landscape, but I don't know.
Mhm.
It's gone, and my memory isn't the greatest and stuff, and it distorts things too. So I think that I think that I like the idea of there being a tension between the layer of the abstract layer and I don't want it to be like cohesive.
Mhm.
So it's about an interaction, but it's also about a reaction. I don't want it to be sort of harmonious colors. I want them to be a little disruptive in the way that they react to each other. I think that gives the paintings vibrancy or
Mhm.
tension and kind of a depth to it. Um, it really wasn't like I really started becoming way more, I guess I would say, uh, in tune with my color sense, like with that library project. And part of the reason it was like, we were doing a lot of it during COVID, and it was a mural that had to be 100% off site. And I made it on panels that were made by Fig House Studios and make great panels. They're amazing. Um, but my whole studio, again, like the Mouse Mocha piece, I mean, there's 52 different panels in that three murals for that piece. The main piece of it, um, we could only see a quarter of it at a time. And so I would do, and the main centerpiece of that mural is made up of, I can't remember, maybe 14 panels or maybe 16 panels or eight, but they're 7 feet high.
Mhm.
So my whole studio was just the top half of the mural, and I'm going around spraying the gradient, and my whole studio just became filled with this yellow and orange to kind of
Mhm.
reddish orange at the top, purplish kind of reddish orange at the top. And it just this feeling of the color. It was like I realized like every moment before that, I was like, oh, I've been picking colors up until now, not using color.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, oh, like I need to use color, not feel it. Like I mean, not pick it. Like I'm
Mhm.
not choosing colors that look good. I need to use colors that
Mhm.
give the reaction that I'm interested in. And it was
Mhm.
kind of like it was kind of like a weird, profound experience, to be. And I think that again, like I mean, I would like to hope that that I couldn't have discovered it any earlier, but I mean, I definitely felt like, like when we were talking before the show about like kind of painter culture and stuff, I didn't, that was the kind of like, I don't know, I would say like kind of almost like hippie painting culture thing that I thought I'd never say,
Mhm.
like, that seems like something my teachers would have said, like, don't pick color, use color. I'd be like, what do they mean? I don't know what they're talking about. But I think it's like through that experience. And I think there's like that Matisse quote about, I don't know, about the green, color, square this big of green versus a square this big of green. And so I think that having that experience in my studio with the giant fade going from this yellow to orange to purple in my studio and just feeling it so intensely, something that ever since that work, which was in 2020, probably that was probably around 2021, um, has been more and more a part of the work,
Hmm.
you know.
Well, it's such an immersive experience, like what you're talking about, being surrounded by that color. And I think it was also like the climate of the times, with everybody no longer being out with others. We were all looking inward a little bit more. And then to be in your studio with that color, I feel like it would be this, kind of profound experience of being a visual person and with all of these different elements at play in the world and in your work. Well, Joe, this has been such a blast
Oh,
talking
thanks,
about your work.
thanks.
I really enjoyed it. And I have one more question for you, which
Yeah,
is,
absolutely.
you've had such a robust experience as an artist and also as a teacher. And you've really, like I was saying, I love that you say yes, like, oh, 150 feet. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which I find incredible. Uh, do you have any advice that maybe somebody has given you or that you have found really helpful giving students that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I don't know. I feel like I'm in school giving advice all the time.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that you know, and then I mean, it's actually pretty funny. And then I'll have students, those students who go on and continue, and they'll be like, "Oh, you said this thing that was so important to me," and I'm like, "What?" And then they'll say it back to me, and I'm like, "Oh God," like, I'm like, "That's how terrible." I mean, I think at one time I was like, I remember there's actually one of my former students who's a muralist too, and she said to me, she said. That I used to say, and this is not me now, but I used to say, never underestimate the power of cool, right? Like, and I think what I was trying to say, even though it sounds kind of like some cheesy line or something from a movie or something, but I think what I was trying to say at that time is like when that sense of wonder, that sense of moment that I was describing earlier is like, you know, you're when you're fall in love with a work of art and you're just sitting in front of it and you're like, cool.
Mhm.
Like, I think that we sometimes forget how much, um, how powerful that is and how much we convince people and how much we communicate with people and how much and what that means. And so I think that, you know, that's one of those things that I think is important advice to remember is that I think that so much of art gets marginalized in our society already. And then I think those of us who are practitioners in the world of it can often get so jaded so quickly, you know, because we're in the art world and it's a place that, you know, can make you jaded. But I do think that sometimes it's like, I think it's really important to remember that um, just sitting in front of a piece of work that you think is cool and sitting and wondering is there's a great deal of things that happen within inside us and then happen outside in the world. And I think that's a powerful moment that is good for us all to remember. And if you can't find that piece, keep looking because I see it everywhere. And I think that if you're only looking at contemporary work and you don't feel it, then go find it somewhere else. And if you're only looking in the museum and don't find it, get out in the galleries. I think I think that too often we can get really um, jaded into the elements of what art making and the difficulties and the challenges of it. And then I think that um, having touchstones that remind us, it could be the same piece that we see over and over. I teach in this is a really long answer, sorry. Like
No,
I
I love it.
like I teach in Italy and I have a program that I run in Siena. And like I mentioned earlier, I studied in Siena too. And, for the larger work and for the gallery size work, Duccio's My from 1310 has always been such a huge impact on me. And it's something that like I always kind of like sneak up on it when I see it. And I'm like, is it still gonna make, is it still gonna have an effect on me? Is it still, I'm still gonna feel the same? And 9 times out of 10, it always does. And I think that it's important for us to kind of remember where those elements of art that has truly moved us can be,
Yes, I love that. What moves us, finding, and I think mostly right now in the art world and just in the world, finding something that brings awe,
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
lights us up,
Absolutely. Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and it's
Yep.
so
Yep.
important. So I love this answer and what you're sharing. I think it's something we all need, artists and non-artists.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Joe, thank you so much. Can you
Oh,
share
thank you.
where we can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me, anywhere, I guess. Just my website's joewardwell.com. And then I show at the La Montagne Gallery in Boston. You can see the archives of shows and then through the Mass MoCA website, whatever.
Great. Well, we'll be sharing it over on Instagram on our end and over it on the website. And again, Joe, just thanks for sharing your day and your process with us.
Oh, thanks for listening. Yeah, thanks for all the great questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.